Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you've had a very satisfying lunch and, or, lentils or whatever, if you happen to be cynic philosophers out there. And so now we're at one of the most exciting moments of the day, and I'd like to introduce a fellow Torontonian, one of the finest young podcasters of our generation, and a fine figure of a man with nerves of steel. It's Peter Limberg, the founder of the Toronto Stoics, and he's going to rise to the challenge of coordinating the lightning round. So without further ado, I'm handing over to Peter. Peter, take it away.
Beautiful. I'll try to live up to that introduction, Donald. So welcome everyone to the lightning rounds. This is an hour of rapid fire talks on Stoicism. And so we're just going to start right away. I'll give you the protocols on how it's going to work. We have 10 speakers ready. Each is going to speak for 5 minutes on topics that range from COVID, boxing, weight loss, nonviolent communication, and much more. So for the speakers, be ready to be called on any time. I'll call in your name. I'm not going to call your last name because I don't want to butcher it. And I'll read the title of your talk if you gave it to me. And then unmute yourself and begin, and I will time. It's 5 minutes. So when there's 90 seconds left, I will show this on my screen briefly. When there's 30 seconds left, I will show this, and that means wrap it up. And then I will unmute myself when the 30 seconds passes, and you'll hear this. And then stop right away. I'll jump in and just say thank you, and then we'll take in the next person. Everyone understood amongst the speakers? Can you give me a thumbs up? All right, drum roll. All right, so up next, let's see, who should we pick? Let's go with David. And David, feel free to say your last name to your full name when you start. So David, his talk is "Could Seneca Laugh at Himself?" David, you are up.
Thanks very much. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm David Hildner, coming in from Madison, Wisconsin. Participants in today's Stoicon need no reminding that Seneca's letters to Lucilius are some of the most accessible and attractive writings that we have from Roman Stoicism. Although we have no replies from Lucilius nor much information about his existence or his biography, Seneca writes these letters in a more personal tone to his younger friend, inquires after his health, shows concern for his moral development, but also injects moments of humor. Letter number 12 is remarkable in this respect, since Seneca indulges in what I take as a sort of self-deprecation or self-satire in the interest of bringing home a philosophic point. He starts on a very non-didactic note and confesses, quote, "Wherever I turn, I see fresh evidence of my old age." This is no sage piece of advice to a younger man, but a frank acknowledgement of his own decline. He then launches into one of the longest personal anecdotes of the whole collection of letters. He recently made a visit to his country estate and immediately began to complain about its dilapidated state. He even confesses that he lost his temper and vented his irritation on the nearest target. Remember, this is the same author who condemned all sorts of anger in his treatise on anger. He thoughtlessly assumed that the manager was neglecting the buildings and the plantings, but the servant assured him, even with a solemn oath, that he had done everything possible to maintain them, but that they were just too old. This last bit of information, given that Seneca supervised the building and planting during his own lifetime, took him aback. The evidence was not mainly verbal, but visual. And he admits that my old age was made clear to me, or maybe we could say appeared before my eyes. And it's every aspect of his estate that presents this unavoidable fact to him. He repeats the phrase, "wherever I turn," or "at every turn." So the normally self-assured Seneca shows himself confronted with what he later calls an unpleasant reality. And the final check to his reality, final touch, I should say, to his reality check comes when he sees a decrepit old servant guarding the door. Seneca even makes fun of him, mentioning his loss of teeth and commenting, "The door's the proper place for him, all right. He looks as if he's on the way out." Of course, the joke is on Seneca. The old servant says, "I was your playmate as a boy." Having reminded himself and Lucilius of the facts of the case, he proceeds to make a sort of defense of old age with some rather atypical arguments. First, he proposes that, quote, fruits are most welcome when almost over. Youth is most charming at its close. The last drink delights the drinker, which puts the finishing touch on his drunkenness. Next, he affirms that life is most delightful when it's on the downward slope, but has not yet reached the abrupt decline. Then he passes on to an argument more in keeping with the Stoic tradition. He says, the very fact of our not wanting pleasures has taken the place of the pleasures themselves. How comforting it is to have tired out one's appetites and to have done with them. And to top off what one might call this rationalization, he admits that no one is so old that it would be improper for him to hope for another day of existence. Are we seeing here a Seneca disturbed by external impressions, offering lame rationalizations and about inevitable old age and death? That interpretation is possible, but I think it's just as likely that he's playing the exaggerated role of a non-philosophic individual to show Lucilius how off-putting that attitude is, and that he hopes his correspondent will learn from this counterexample. He's perhaps willing to portray himself as weaker than he is in order to provoke a reaction in the receiver of the letter. In other words, he's using a more indirect way of counseling than we usually see in his writings. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And so we have some extra time. We might be able to squeeze in another person right at the end. So up next, we got James. The title is On Anger in Boxing. Ooh, James, you're up.
Hi there. As a competitive fighter, first I just want to say that I'm quite used to going to a sports hall and waiting around for hours whilst everyone else puts in their performance and then being given a few intense minutes to do my stuff. So thank you. This is a real home from home for me. I'm James Southwood. I'm a world champion in savate, which is French boxing. That's boxing with the hands and the feet, not kickboxing, but this needn't detain us here. You can look up my stuff if you're interested. Today, I'm going to talk to you about Stoic boxing. If thinking about boxing, the first virtue I think most people would go for is courage. And I'm here to tell you that I think it's temperance. Temperance is judged by what you can refrain from doing. And that's what boxing is all about. You learn to refrain from your normal style of walking around. You refrain from letting your hands drop when you punch. You refrain from flinching when a punch comes towards you. And you've got to refrain from losing your head in more ways than one. For Seneca, anger is devoid of self-control, regardless of decorum, and dead to reason and advice. That does not sound like boxing to me. Boxing is about well-applied reason and tactics. It has form and harmony and decorum. And most of all, it relies on self-control. Jack Dempsey was a heavyweight champion 100 years ago, and he said, anger is an unwelcome guest in any department of boxing. You see, we have our ancient writers too. And as Stoics, we often say, but perhaps less often practice, the idea that any injustice or frustration is a welcome opportunity to practice a better response. And in boxing, you get given the chance to be punched in the face by your peers and all the while work on the best response to that. Go to a boxing gym and witness your own flinching, cowardly behavior under the threat of a well-placed punch from a well-trained opponent, and then appreciate the skill with which these young fighters hold their nerve and react in wisdom and not in fury to what is happening to them. Boxing is both an exercise in and training for Stoic self-control. But to the public, you see violence, which is disorganized. So you probably infer a disorganized anger in the participants. But to a true boxer, a punch is never thrown in anger. I'd hit you, but I'm angry, right? A punch has a purpose. It's guided by prudence. And It's governed by the rules of the sport and by a fitness that is granted you only by discipline. Quote, everyone thinks this is a tough man's sport. This is not a tough man's sport. This is a thinking man's sport. A tough man is going to get hurt real bad if they do this sport. Mike Tyson. My thesis is not that these are model Stoics, much less model citizens, but that they do employ a characteristically Stoic reason, response to adversity, and impulse control when boxing, which means that boxing, like almost any human endeavor that is taxing and demanding, eventually ferments a Stoic with a capital S understanding in its adherents. More praise Stoicism. My thesis is that boxers will benefit from a training or grounding in Stoic philosophy when learning their craft. I have quoted Marcus Aurelius ringside, straight in the face of a boxer in a corner minute, saying, ask yourself, can you bear this? If yes, then stop complaining. Every boxing gym I've ever been in has got a picture of Muhammad Ali on the wall, the one with him standing over Sonny Liston in their second fight. My fighters, self-control is favored over excitation. They know the folly of reacting badly to an opponent or to a referee or anybody else. They know what fair play is, and they understand it's a sport that's played for a very short time. I hope they know how to stay upright in virtue, if not always in posture. My gym is a Stoic boxing gym, and the black and white picture on my wall is of Seneca. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Prudent Punches sounds like a good Stoic book if you ever want to use that title. Let's go to Gita. Her title is Modern Uses of Stoicism, 3 Case Studies. Gita, if you can unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gita Leitlande, and I am a PhD student at the University of Latvia. And it is a real honor to me to address today this distinguished audience, and a big thanks goes to organizers to giving me an opportunity to introduce some highlights from my upcoming dissertation. The topic of my dissertation is Stoicism and its modern uses, and it will be my perspective on the questions of what modern Stoicism is and how it differs from ancient version of Stoicism, including by tackling the issues of most heated debates like what to do with cosmology and is it still a philosophy or already a self-help program. However, the issue I would like to share with you today forms the second part of my dissertation, containing 3 case studies that represent various kinds of applications Stoicism has today. Through them, I will show synergy between ancient and modern interpretations of the teaching. The first one is applying it to the military service. Lawrence Becker, in his vision of uninterrupted history of Stoicism, imagines that only 3 groups of supporters of the teaching have survived throughout history, and the first of them are soldiers. Military are obvious clients of Stoicism, and indeed, military can pretty much apply ancient Stoicism in its Roman form as we know it without any refreshing, including vertical context of the ethics. For example, Epictetus' approach regarding destiny closely resembles military service. His understanding of assigned roles, which we should play as best as we can, is exactly how appointments are being assigned to soldiers to this day. The why one should comply here is as important as what. So the first example is good old ancient Stoicism. The second case study regards taking care of environment. This was not a topic for ancients in a sense that the concern is modern. Although Stoicism is anthropocentric, taking care of environment represents an example of how modern Stoics have found a way by carefully extending the ancient worldview to apply their teaching to sustainable policies and practices. Here as well, a tenet from physics that the world is one whole entity and that we are all related is instrumental. Thus, the second example is applying and extending Stoicism to modern challenges. The third one is not yet really a case study, as it is more forward-looking approach in the area of education. Namely, can Stoicism be applied as an asset to teach virtues in education system? Because all four core virtues are a natural fit in a lineup of virtues that school systems should seek to promote. At least it is the case in Latvia. In order to invigorate focus of character development and virtue education to be good citizens, as opposed to improving discipline, for example, I would like to explore, can education system benefit from offering a Stoic storyline in virtue education at schools? Of course, in this case, it would be a jump from individualistic application of the teaching to more systematic. With this, the third example constitutes, I believe, more ambitious but selective case of application of Stoicism. My initial conclusion on what these three examples bring to the table is that the way Stoicism is applied, or more precisely, for what purposes, has its implications on the shape of Stoicism itself. In these three cases, ethics alone would not be as efficient as adding also a vertical dimension of the Stoicism. And by vertical dimension, I mean cosmic nature as far as it explains individual tenets of ethics, somewhat in line how Epictetus did that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gita. All right. Up next, let me feel into this. I got to go with Stoic Dan, Marcus, and masking.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Stoic Dan from Orlando, Florida. If Marcus Aurelius were alive today, how would he use Stoic cosmopolitanism to guide his actions during a pandemic? And would he wear a mask for the welfare of others? Well, at first, you might say, Marcus Aurelius, who lived from 121 to 180 AD, he can't know what we're going through now. But remember, he also lived through a pandemic. It was a pandemic of a different kind. It was known as the Antonine Plague. Some say it was smallpox, and it lasted for over 10 years. But Marcus was a very introspective Stoic, and he collected ideas in his diary, which was never meant to be published. I think it's very fortunate that we have this book passed down to us in the modern day. This book speaks of many ideas, including cosmopolitanism. And I'm going to read to you quickly from Meditations 2.1, where he says, "For we are made for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the rows of the upper and lower teeth. To act against one another then is contrary to nature, and it is acting against one another to be vexed and to turn away." Well, how fortunate would it be, unfortunate, it would be if we didn't apply these ideas in a time of pandemic. This is when we really need it the most. And we have to realize that there's more than tranquility being threatened. Marcus is showing us how we need to cooperate. And this single idea can be applied to many areas of the pandemic today. For example, people in government should be helping people whose lives are disrupted. People in the supply chain should be working together to keep supplying the needed products. Families and friends should be working together to pool resources. And on the topic at hand, masking, we should behave in public as a cooperative spirit with others. So how can we develop our compassion and our affection for each other? Well, the remarkable part of Stoicism is that it is a practical philosophy, a lived philosophy. I could talk about compassion and empathy, but there's another angle here. We can use the idea of Stoic moderation. And how can this help us in the pandemic? Well, I think moderation can guide us so that we stay home most of the time, but not all of the time. And moderation can also influence how much protection we wear when we go out. We can also use social distancing. I think that overall, we can also embrace the pain and suffering of the pandemic, but also recognize that the pandemic brings us closer together. I mean, we are here right now together. We're learning and we're sharing together. And why not work together to survive in the future as well? I enjoyed reading an article in 2017 by Massimo, where he quoted some lines from Marcus, and to paraphrase them, he said, if we all share reason, we should also recognize that we should use reasoning together. And it reveals, therefore, that we should have a code of conduct together. So this can bring us together in a very real way. But if we simply choose to grasp only what is easy, then we're going to lose touch with what is our humanity. Remember, the word cosmopolitan comes from the Greek word that means a citizen of the world. So it's time to move to the middle. Let's pull together so we can survive another round. And I'm going to end by quoting from Meditations 3.4. I've actually rewritten this line for this talk today. I've substituted a few of Marcus's words. Quote, any person uncontaminated by pandemic, unaffected by politics, can be a citizen of the highest order, one who chooses science over passion, one who is dyed deep with justice and wears a mask in public. So I'd like to hear your comments on this talk. You can find me on social media or stoicdan.com. And thanks for your attention today.
Thank you, Stoic Dan, for the timely topic. For those of you who want to see Marcus with a mask on, you can look at my icon right there. He has a good look for him. All right, so let's see who's next. Let's go with Shanti, returning an essential Stoic practice to Western philosophy. You are up next.
Thank you very much. This is a shortened version of an article that I've written, and you can find it on academia.edu, or you can also find it on my website, shantijones.com. So for the Stoics, philosophy, of course, as we all know, was to be practiced at all times and in all places so that it could become a matter of course. And the emphasis was on practice. And the foundational exercises were actually centered on exercises which developed attention and perception. And the exercises enabled the person, the practitioner, to live consciously in reality. Once Western philosophy and its practices were Christianized and they were essentially lost as originally practiced. So the aim of this talk is to reestablish the importance of attention and perception, and to present a method born out of the Stoic tradition that will enable any person who wants to practice philosophy, as contrasted with thinking about it, to do so. Attention is defined as the notice taken of something or someone. Perception is awareness of physical sensations which get interpreted in light of experience. Together, they give the person the capacity to comprehend what is happening around him and to live in reality. Starting with the Stoics, for much of Western philosophy's history, attention and perception were known as the vehicles for knowing the truth. Without an essential practice to support the development of conscious attention and perception, much of philosophy seems like words which could heal the suffering of man, but actually don't. Most people need to be able to attend and to perceive better than they do, and not only for better philosophizing, but also for better functioning and well-being. And mindfulness is, of course, and all the meditation practices that are put forth today concur. So, of course, we know the Stoics practiced their exercises throughout their life, and they were considered exercises because they were practical and they required effort and training, and they were lived. And they were considered spiritual because rather than simply engaging a person's intellect, they involved his whole being. And the most important and basic were designed to develop attention and perception. So to kind of modernize Stoicism, we can look at other philosophers who have also stressed the importance of attention and perception in our ability to know the truth. So there was Franz Brentano, 1838 to 1917, who talked about noticing and noticing what is there, to fix one's attention upon what is noticed, retain it, and to describe it as accurately as possible without putting anything on top of it. That requires developed attention and perception capacities. Husserl, 1859 to 1938, talked about phenomenological reduction. That's what he called it. And it focuses a person's attention on basic, uninterpreted experiences of perception. There was Merleau-Ponty, for whom perception is a human being's access to truth, and it enables him to philosophize and not just theorize. And of course, there was Simone Weil, who has a really famous article, essay on attention and its importance and its difficulty in maintaining. Chinese and Indian philosophers also have views on attention and perception. And so it behooves Western philosophy, I think, to pick up this practice that is devoted to attention and perception, which they originally had but lost. And it's called the sensing exercise. And I learned it through the work of George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, who obtained this exercise in Greek Orthodox monasteries in which he practiced. And he de-Christianized many of the exercises that he learned and restored them to their original Stoic origins, and the sensing exercise was one of them. I won't have time to go through the sensing exercise for you today, but it is written in its entirety in my article. But basically what it is a scanning of going through each part of the body, starting with your right foot all the way around, sensing as deeply as you can. And then once you have a full sensation of your body, to maintain an attitude of listening while you're sensing. And then when that's stabilized, to open your eyes so that you're sensing, looking, and listening at the same time. And this develops evenly hovering attention between the inside and the outside, and that is our access to truth. So the sensing exercise really provides an excellent groundwork for the next step of making Western philosophy practical and relevant to the betterment of people's lives. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Shanti. Please email me that article where we talk about that exercise. I'll share it in the chats with everyone. I really geek out about that stuff. All right. So next, Gabrielle, you're up. Stoicism and Nonviolent Communication.
Thank you. Yes. How can Stoicism and nonviolent communication go together? That's what I'm going to talk about. Yeah, first, nonviolent communication, or NVC for short, aims to create connection instead of conflict, in large part by enabling people to empathically connect with others and to express themselves honestly. This approach, methodology, can be used in private life or in the workplace, and is used professionally by coaches, counselors, mediators. Now, where does this come from? Yeah, nonviolent communication is based on the writings and practice of psychologist Marshall Rosenberg, who studied for Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology. And just as more prominently in cognitive behavioral therapy, we can actually find signs of Stoic inspiration in the humanistic psychology roots of NVC. Indeed, Marshall Rosenberg expressively quotes Epictetus when writing about the importance of taking responsibility for one's own feelings. Also, just as Stoicism, NVC is cosmopolitan, stresses the commonality of all human beings in the footsteps of nonviolent civil rights movements, from which Rosenberg took the name for his approach. Anyway, one point where we clearly see the similarity with Stoicism is the idea of observation without judgment. Much as Stoics, NVC practitioners are taught to refrain from labeling things as either good or bad. In NVC, first to observe each situation free of judgments, unclouded by prejudice, it enables the flexibility to let go of unproductive strategies and create new ones where everyone's needs are better met. Only then, after this observation, do you connect with your feelings or try to guess those of another. Feelings, yeah. In NVC, you observe them, you name them, distinguish between them, tell them apart, and separate them from thought patterns. And this again is leading to actually some correlation with Stoicism. Like, I can be angry or sad. These are feelings that I can own, so to speak. I can take responsibility for them. But if I would say, I feel hurt or I feel manipulated, then I include the notion of an agent, someone who wronged me. So that is not a pure feeling in NVC. It's a feeling mixed up with some theories and judgments. So much like Stoics are wary of passions, NVC people are wary of these 4 feelings or fake emotions that comes with the idea that I am somehow determined by another or by fate. Yes. And I cannot blame anyone else for what's up to me. I have to take responsibility for the way I handle my feelings that are up to me. And we can move over then to needs, because NVC, all of these feelings are not due to external forces, but signs of our needs, met or unmet needs. And here we see a difference. For whereas Stoics see virtue as the only good and declare health, wealth, and reputation as preferred indifference, in NVC needs, this is everything from health, nurturance, touch, things like efficiency, order, clarity, equality, mutuality, and many virtues could be construed as needs in an NVC context, actually. And needs are also thought of as values sometimes in NVC. And those needs are abstract and common to all humans. So specific urges that we might have or fixed ideas of what we need is just often strategies to meet those underlying needs. And this flexibility then that we can choose new strategies to satisfy a need is like an underlying hope here of this methodology. And also a hope for peace, because if my need for security can be met in another way, I might not have to attack you after all. And all this exploration then of feelings and needs, which might be a little bit different than Stoics are used to, it's basically to free us from our initial impulses and thought patterns so we can better connect with what we truly deeply want for ourselves and others. And that could be virtue. So I could go on, but my time here is running up. And if you do want to know more, you can pick up Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. And there are many other books on YouTube or many podcasts you can check out. I will mention Mika Salaberrio, The Art of NVC. That's a podcast and a book that you could pick up. So I would like to say thank you to you all. I feel excited, happy, and joyful because my need for sharing and to contribute has been met. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabriel. And I do recommend Nonviolent Communication. It's an excellent modality. Okay, so we got, I'm probably pronouncing your first name wrong, so you can correct that. Özgür, title, Stoicism, Liberalism, and International Relations. You are up.
Hello, my name is Özgür Özdamar. I teach international relations at Bilkent University in Ankara. I'd like to start with thanking everyone for organizing this wonderful conference. I'm very happy to be here. Today, I will talk about Stoicism and international politics. This is something I have realized that is not commonly discussed, neither in political science or maybe not even in philosophy that much. And the argument of this very short talk is that the Stoic ideas, although we a lot of times think that they are forgotten, especially in politics, they are still alive and well, and they have actually been the intellectual precursor of one of the dominant paradigms of thinking about world politics, named liberalism or political liberalism. To make this argument, I'm going to talk about 7 ideas. This may be a little bit long, but I'm going to go over them very quickly. These 7 ideas are shared by both earlier and Roman Stoics and liberals. These are individualism, human nature, optimism about human nature, rationality, international law, states and other actors being the ontological focus of international politics, cosmopolitanism, and egalitarianism. Well, many people maybe wouldn't agree that Stoicism as an individualist philosophy, but focusing on individuals' fulfillment, living in harmony with nature, respect to individuals' desire to gain weight, for example, these are all individualist features that you can also see definitely in liberalism. Human nature, both Stoics and liberals are very optimistic about human nature, especially if you can educate humans. Remember, Marcus Aurelius every morning waking up and thinking that, look, I'm the Roman emperor and I'm going to meet a lot of bad people today. They're going to try to cheat me. They're going to lie to me, etc. But I'm not going to be angry with them. Why? Because they're not educated, right? That's how he thought. So this is also the liberal thinking. People may do bad things, people may cheat, but that's because actually they're not educated. So there's a trust for human nature. Third idea is that humans have capacity to reason for Stoics, and for liberals, modern liberals, individuals, decision makers, states, leaders are rational. Everybody is rational, and rationally following their interests will lead to progress of the whole society or humanity. The idea of international law begins perhaps with Stoics, and definitely the liberals are the biggest proponents of international law and institutions in the modern era. The argument is international law and institutions will bring peace and prosperity to humanity. For many IR scholars, this is a big discussion. For others, maybe it's a trivial point, but what is the focus of international relations? Is it the states, institutions, individuals? For both Stoics and liberals, they are all. So there's something beyond states and the politics between states. Individuals matter in international politics, institutions matter, ideas matter, and there are more important things than your state and your state's political goals. Cosmopolitanism, one of the lightning speakers just talked about it, definitely a Stoic idea, a feeling of belonging to humanity, fellowship of humans, and the Roman Stoics especially very cosmopolitan. Liberals are very cosmopolitan as well. And lastly, egalitarianism, Stoics' respect for women, foreigners, other cultures, even slaves is definitely a liberal idea in the last 200 years, as we have seen in the form of liberal feminism, anti-slavery, evolutionism, anti-colonialism, and respect for minorities. Very shortly, the conclusion is Stoic ideas are still alive in politics. Maybe we don't talk about it because this is something not many people study or make the connection, but actually Stoic ideas have shaped some of the very major paradigms of international politics, especially liberalism. Stoics and Roman Stoics influenced Christianity, and then those influenced early modernity, and then now in modernity and now liberalism represents the ideas of original Stoics. Thank you.
Made it just in time. Thank you, Özgür. Caleb, you're up next. Let's see, what is your title? Defensive Stoicism Considered Harmful.
Thanks, Peter. All right, so my name is Caleb Ontiveros. I'm a programmer, have a background in philosophy, and created Stoa, a Stoic meditation app, which you can find on the Play Store or App Store. My talk is on framing Stoicism and how that has changed for me over time. So there's no doubt that Stoicism is a powerful tool for enduring life's hardship. There's what I call defensive Stoicism. Defensive Stoicism is a word for the stance where you orient the philosophy around eliminating negative emotions. You focus on being resilient, conquering the mind, having this inner citadel. I think this stance has its benefits, but occasionally focusing on the defensive aspects of Stoicism rules out some of the positive upside. So I'll give two examples of the defensive framing. Consider a contemporary case. You have James Stockdale, who has a fantastic book called Courage Under Fire, which recounts his time as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam era. When he is captured, he famously whispers to himself, "I'm leaving the world of technology and entering the world of Epictetus." Stoicism, the philosophy and the practice, is an important tool he used to survive. And that's what defensive Stoicism can offer. It's a way to survive things as dreadful as a war camp. And then take an ancient example. Like we have this striking case from Epictetus where he talks about the exercise of the jugs. He says, if you are fond of a jug, say you are fond of a jug, then you'll not be disturbed if it be broken. If you kiss your child or your wife, say to yourself that you are kissing a human being, for then if death strikes it, you will not be disturbed. So this reminds us of the fact of loss, which is an inescapable fact of life. And Stoicism gives you the tools to deal with this sort of thing gracefully by focusing on judgment, questioning impressions, and building an inner citadel. But there's another side of Stoicism that's less about surviving life, and it's more positive. We don't always need to be preparing against loss or hardship. Instead, we can be creating things that are worth losing. And I think it's here where, on the margin, there could be more of a positive vision of Stoicism, where you might promote moving through the world, shaping it, dying events with your own color. And this offensive version of Stoicism, positive version of Stoicism, is focused on being virtuous, creating art, plans, friendships, companies, doing important research. This kind of Stoicism is less concerned with surviving life and more concerned with being virtuous, building character. What Stoicism is, what tools are useful, and which parts of the philosophy one highlights changes through life. There have been some points in my life where I've thought that the defensive aspects are more useful, and other parts of my life where I think the positive side of focusing on virtue, being more outward focused, is more useful. So the purpose of this, I suppose, is just to ask a question. Which parts of Stoicism are worth emphasizing for you now? The inward-facing defensive aspects, or the outward-facing positive side? Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Caleb. And I just realized we follow each other on Twitter, and I'm like, oh, this is the Caleb, the meditation app. So it's great to finally meet you. And I was hoping we could bring someone else in, Eric Rankin. Is that possible, Phil? Because we have time to sneak another person in. So if you can bring him in, that would be great. And we will go to Roger, who just got pulled in, so we don't know what he's going to talk about. Roger, you're up.
Hello from Maui, Hawaii. My name is Roger Johnston. I'm a multi-war combat vet. I'm also a mental health clinician. I run the mental health clinic here in Maui for combat veterans. The primary focus of my practice is combat trauma and sexual trauma. My story with Stoicism starts about 20 years ago. One of the previous speakers said that soldiers are naturally inclined to lean towards Stoicism, and that's true. I use Stoicism to conduct myself calmly in combat and to be able to perform there, because the calmer that you are in combat, the more likely you're going to survive. And what I found, I was medevaced out of Iraq in 2008. And I remember distinctly being on the aircraft and crossing the Kuwaiti border. The medic was like, "Well, Sergeant, the war's over for you." Now, as the son of a Vietnam veteran, I told him the war is just starting for me. And I knew that I was going to have to do a lot of work. And Stoicism, while it was effective while I was in combat, it's been 10 times more effective out of it. And what I've noticed in my practice, and as a survivor of some of the worst things that humanity can experience, is that uncertainty is a human condition that's very difficult for a lot of people to deal with. And we all crave certainty. And events like trauma and childhoods and those types of things, they cause a rift, in our thinking, that uncertainty is just so difficult to deal with. And I think that Stoicism is is just like the sword that slays that uncertainty. And so with the veterans that I help and the sexual trauma victims that I help, I think that especially soldiers, we're super inclined to want to be free, and we want to be free of the emotions that swirl around in our head. We want to be free from the uncertainty that we have to deal with in the world, and the uncertainty that that we find ourselves in with our existence, and we crave that freedom above everything else. So what I tell my veterans, I basically break it down. I teach a group on Stoicism and a half for 5 years every Wednesday night. My veterans call it small circle therapy. I go, okay, just remember, just stay in your small circle. And the small circle of therapy, you know, what they call jokingly small circle therapy, is that we have a very small circle of things that we can control. And the way I frame it to veterans, because they're very keen to understand chaos and know what fortune's capable of doing. So I talk about all the things that many of you know about, you know, the things that you can control and understanding the dichotomy of control. But what I really emphasize with them is that you really have to understand what fortune is capable of doing, and that the only thing that you can control is input. The only thing that you can control is who you are as a human being. She can take everything from you, everything. But what she can't take is who you are. That's it. And then the other one that I always emphasize with them is, and the thing that has, these two things have helped me tremendously in my own life, is that it's not events that are the problem. They never are. The human story has been played out several times. I'm in the middle of it myself. And it's not the events. It's our expectations of events. It's our judgments about events. It's our perspective of events and things like that. That's what we're reacting to. And because other people can react different ways, there's probably a good chance that our view of it isn't correct, or it may be, but there's a different way to handle it. And so that is an external. An event is an external. The internal is how you respond to those events. So creating that space and understanding that judgment is super important. So I appreciate the on-the-spot thing, and I've been very passionate about Stoicism for a long time, and it helps. It helps. It's changed my life. And it's changed life for many, many, many combat veterans that I've helped too. And there's no doubt that the reason why a lot of modern therapy is based in Stoic thought. And thank you for the opportunity. I have no idea what time it is, but those were the basic things that I wanted to talk about. And thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Just you nailed it. Perfect timing. Thanks so much, Roger, for jumping in last minute with such a powerful message. Few people are asking for your contact. I'd like to get in contact with you as well. So if you can respond there, that'd be great. Eric, thanks for jumping in last minute as well. You are up.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot, Peter. Thanks to Massimo. Thanks to Donald. Stoicism is awesome. I'm a big advocate. I was lucky to have a piece that was published in this month's Stoic Gym talking about political civility. And so that's one of the issues that I wanted to talk about today. I teach political science at Illinois State University. I've done that for 21 years, and I'm a former elected official at the local level. And oftentimes I think that this isn't an issue that is specific to the United States. This is obviously something that crosses borders. As we have had this sense of growing polarization, that the middle has all but evaporated, and people have found themselves firmly entrenched in their corners. Political civility was most often defined as politeness. And I think that most of us would agree that in today's political circles, politeness is something that seems to have evaporated. The focus has now become for most people on winning arguments. And so they show up to a conversation about politics already having their minds made up. The cup is already metaphorically full. And so what happens at that point in time is that any sort of conversation doesn't tend to bear any fruit. And so I really started to think what Stoicism has the ability to teach us about political civility. And, again, Marcus Aurelius, an emperor, well-groomed in political discourse, does give us direction, right? So I said that civility begins and ends with us. And if Stoic philosophy is at root about controlling our judgments in the forming of our impressions, then we have to cultivate patience, not only with our rhetorical sparring partners that we have, but also with ourselves. So how do we practice patience when this person on the other side of me is saying something that is so insane? And sometimes we have to take a step back and we have to understand that there's a reason why the individual thinks and feels the way that we do. I don't understand their entire story. I loved the quote from Epictetus: "What is the first business of one who practices philosophy? It's to get rid of self-conceit. For it is impossible for anyone to begin to learn that which he thinks he already knows." So coming equipped to a conversation, already having the outcome planned, doesn't allow us to come to conversation with open minds. Civility is a difficult process, and it has become increasingly difficult as we have found that political beliefs are so deep rooted and ingrained in who we are. It may have come from your father or your mother yelling at the TV and throwing their shoe at it every time they saw a specific politician speak on TV, or whatever news station that they watch with a political bias. But I think that Stoics at root have a hunger to learn from others, even those that they don't agree with. We can learn from all different types of experiences, civil and uncivil. But my point is typically is that civility is choice worthy, right? It allows us to better control our emotions. My classical political philosophy students just took an oral final exam with me, and in it they read John Seller's Lessons in Stoicism. And I loved a line that he said in there. He said, "Our emotions are products of our judgments." And in political conversation, we tend to make those judgments very quickly and very ferociously. So in these very difficult and really, right, we see we're being beset by a global pandemic, unrest, emotions are high. We have to dig deep and recall our shared humanity, realizing that we are all connected through the logos, right? That we have this ability to understand that we were made for each other. And we can grow as a global community if we actually practice seeing ourselves as a global community, right? Civility is not the same as agreement or absence of criticism. Those are all fundamental to who we are as humans, but treating other people with decency, listening, and accepting responsibility for our rhetoric is paramount. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak. It was great. Practice your political civility as much as you can in these very, very difficult times. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks so much, Eric. And a lot of what you said resonates, because I do agree that Stoicism is a perfect philosophy for the quote unquote culture war that we're in. So I'll make some closing thoughts, and I'll take Donald in. When I was reviewing all these lightning rounds speakers who are applying, I got really excited because last time I was talking to Massimo when he came on my podcast, we talked about how Stoicism is really an ecumenical philosophy. And not only does it get along quite nicely with other philosophies or religions like Christianity or Buddhism, it gets along with many activities, whether it be boxing, communication, weight loss, international relations. And I would say it heightens those activities as well, because it gets to repurpose them as an opportunity to practice our Stoicism. So a project I'm working on right now is called the Stoa. You can find it at thestoa.ca. I'm doing a lot with Eric is talking about, actually, so you can check that out there. And I had a lot of fun listening to everyone today, and I hope you did as well. So that being said, I will take Donald back in.